Skeletal System, Function, and Structure lecture. On this slide we have the objectives that will be covered in this lecture. The skeletal system has 5 main functions. The first function is support. Bones form the body's framework to provide support. 2, protection. Bones protect the delicate structures enclosed within them. Some examples are the skull, which protects the brain, and the ribs, which protect the heart and lungs. 3, movement. Muscles are anchored to bones, and muscles contract and pull the bones to move them. 4, stores calcium, which is necessary for nerve and muscle function. And 5, hematopoiesis, which is the process of blood cell formation that is carried on in the red bone marrow. There are types of bones, and they are classified usually by their shape. The long bone, an example of this would be the humerus, which is the upper arm. The short bone, which an example of this would be the carpals and the wrists. Flat bones, which an example of this would be the frontal bone of the skull. Irregular bones, an example would be vertebrae in the spine. Sesamoid or round bones, an example of this would be the patella, which is also called the kneecap. Structures of the long bone. There are many structures within the long bones. The diaphyses or shaft is a hollow tube of hard compact bone. The medullary cavity is a hollow space inside the diaphyses that contains yellow marrow, which is an inactive and fatty form of marrow found in adult skeletons. You won't find this in children, and it's very different than red bone marrow. The epiphyses or ends of the bone is made of spongy bone that contains red bone marrow. The articular cartilage is a thin layer that covers each epiphysis, which provides a cushion. The periosteum is a strong, fibrous membrane covering the bone everywhere except for the joint surfaces. In the joint surfaces, we have cartilage that covers them. That's why the periosteum is not present. The endosteum is a thin membrane that lines the medullary cavity. So in the next slide, we have a picture of the long bone, and really the parts that I want you to be aware of are the epiphyses on each bone, the diaphyses in the middle. We have the periosteum, which covers the middle of the bone, the long bone, and then the epiphyseal line, which we will talk more about, growth plates, in later slides, and the cancellous or spongy bone structures that you see in the epiphyses. Structures of the flat bone. There's thin layers of compact bone surrounding the cancellous bone. Open spaces within the spongy bone are surrounded by a bony trabeculae. That trabeculae I think of as support beams for the actual bone. So here's a picture of our flat bone. So we have the cancellous bone in the middle, and then the compact bone surrounding it to create that flat surface. There are 2 main types of connective tissue. We have bones, and then we have cartilage. We also have 2 different types of bones. We have dense, and then we also have spongy type bones. We have the spongy bone, which the textures from the needle-like threads of bones are called trabeculae, surrounded by a network of open spaces. Spongy bones are typically found in the epiphyses of the bones, and the space contains red bone marrow. A red bone marrow is responsible for red blood cell production. So here is a picture of a microscopic structure of the bone. So in A we have a picture of our long bone. We've taken a section, and now you can see what it looks like in B. B shows, and we want to note that the compact bone forming the hard shell of the bone is constructed in cylinder-like units called osteons. So cylinder-like, so this is a big round circle, as you can see up here. And the spongy bone is constructed of bony projections or columns-like that have trabeculae, which you can see down below here. And throughout the trabeculae and the open spaces, you will see blood vessels running through them and providing nutrients. In C, this shows the osteon system organization. So this is zoomed out a little bit and it shows the osteon. The other bone type is dense, or sometimes we call it compact, which the structural unit of the osteon is calcified in matrix and is arranged in multiple layers or rings called concentric lamellae. And bone cells are called osteocytes, which are found inside spaces called lacunae, which are connected by tiny tubes called caniculi. And then they are all covered by the periosteum. Osteum, or it's also called the Haversian system. The structural unit is called an osteon, or the Haversian system, which is composed of the concentric lamellae, lacunae, caniculi, and the central canal of osteons contains those blood vessels. So the osteon in spongy bone is found in the epiphyses of the bone. It appears porous to the naked eye with many open spaces and matrix. These spaces contain red bone marrow, and the texture results from needle-like threads of bone called trabeculae. Cartilage, which the cell type is called a chondrocyte, is located in the lacunae. The matrix is flexible gel-like substance that lacks blood vessels. So this is different in that there's gel-like substance with our cartilage. Bone is calcified, hard-like substance. And cartilage is different from bone in that it lacks blood vessels. This is why the healing and rebuilding process for cartilage is so much slower than it is in bones. So we have many different bone cells. So we have osteoclasts here in A, which are multinucleated cells, and they remove bone. So clasts remove bone. Blasts in B here, we have blasts which form bone. So I take B in blasts and the F from forming, and they're best friends, BFs. That's how I remember it. And you will need to know the difference on your exam for osteoclasts and osteoblasts. C shows osteocytes, which are mature bone cells that are located in the lacunae of compact bone. Bone formation and growth. So new bone forming cells are called osteoblasts. Bone reabsorbing cells are called osteoclasts. The ability of bone to ossify, grow, and change shape, heal after injury, and respond to stress occurs because of the continuous sculpting of blasts and clasts. So we think of sculpting as a process by which osteoblasts and clasts allow bones to respond to stress and injury by changing size, shape, and density. We will also hear the word remodeling, which is when bone changes, there are changes in the bone from small cartilage models to an adult, which requires continuous activity by osteoblasts. And what we think of is like our growth plates. We're remodeling, we're creating bone structures when we're kids, and they remodel to fuse together and cause not cartilage, but then a bone formation. Bone formation and growth. Bone is formed by two processes. Most bones develop from a process called endochondral ossification, which is the process of forming bones from cartilage models. Some flat bones form in connective tissue membranes by other processes, like the skull bone. Bones develop from cartilage models, and center of ossification first appears in the diaphyses. Centers of ossification then develop the epiphyses. Growth ends when all epiphyseal cartilage has become bone. The epiphyseal plate of cartilage between epiphyses and diaphyses remains until skeletal maturity. The epiphyseal line, which is bone, replaces the epiphyseal plate, which is cartilage, when growth ceases. So this shows that when children are young, there's going to be cartilage in the lacunae of the bone matrix, and this is where what we see when we look at the epiphyseal line when it is not fused. Bone formation and growth. Early bone development before birth consists of cartilage and fibrous structures. So we are forming bones way before we are born. And cartilage models are gradually replaced by calcified bone matrices, and the process is called the endochondral ossification. Osteoblasts form new bones, and clasts reabsorb that bone. New bones lay down organic material followed by calcium salts. That's why it's so important to have adequate source of calcium to form that new bone. Endochondral ossification. So here's a picture of the whole process. So we're going to go through this, and your book also has the same pictures. So A is the formation that begins with cartilage. So we just have cartilage. B is the invasion of the diaphysis or the shaft, which you can see here in the middle, by blood vessels, and is combined with actions of osteoblasts and clasts that result in the formation of a calcification within that cavity. And the appearance is of bone-like tissue then, which you can see in C. So this yellow is the bone-like tissue, since it had been getting blood supply. In D, you see the centers of ossification, which also appear. So that's the pinkish color here, that's the ossification. In the epiphyses ends, so you can start to see in the epiphyse ends the ossification start of the bones. And then in F, you can see the epiphyseal plate, which is right here, okay, which is an indication that this is bone that has not matured yet, and that there is additional growth that is possible within this bone. So the epiphyseal plate, if this is present on an x-ray, which we oftentimes can see, if this is present, that child is still going to grow. If this is closed and there is no plate and there's just a line, which you see in G here, then that means there's no growth going forward. And G here shows the mature bone only with a faint epiphyseal line, which marks where the cartilage has disappeared and the ossification has fused these parts together. So here's an infant skeleton which has many bones, and each place here that we have marked and labeled is a place where there is an epiphyseal line or a growth plate that needs to fuse together. So typically growth plates fuse together in children at different ages, and it really depends on maturity, but typically the age range for growth plates to fuse are 12 to 14 for girls and 15 to 16 in boys. That's not to say that it typically happens then. Some children are very late in this. That's why we say strenuous activity, especially like activities like running, long distance sports, and that sort of thing. We typically don't advise children to do that until they are at least 18, and if not older, because sometimes these growth plates are still developing. What can happen if children injure their growth plates? This can cause malformation in bones. It can also cause problems down the road with arthritis. So we really want children to be able to grow, and we don't want to inhibit that process by putting extra stress on the bones of the body while they are growing and developing.